All right, cool. So welcome class. I'm here today with Emily Hemmert, a friend of mine, who also runs a nonprofit charity that works in development. So I thought you guys would like to get her perspective on development issues and issues that she faces. She runs a charity that works specifically with Honduras. And so we're going to start with some questions and see where it goes. So first, Emily, tell us about yourself, where you're from, what do you do, what else you want to say?
Yeah, so I'm from Austin, Nevada, which some of you may be familiar with. I'm a sixth generation Nevadan. My husband actually got his associates at GBC, followed by a bachelor's at UNR and a master's at UNLV. And we are big advocates for GBC and for smaller colleges because I feel like they give kids a better experience at a better price. And so I also went to a small university. I went to NAU in Flagstaff, Arizona, and I have a degree in environmental science that has an emphasis in policy administration. So I've always had kind of an interest in political science. I'm one of those weird people that likes to read the news, and that's kind of my background. I haven't worked a lot in the environmental field other than right after graduating, I worked as a recycling coordinator for the state in Vegas while my husband was at UNLV. But now I'm a stay-at-home mom, and like you mentioned, I run a nonprofit, which is kind of cool because it's something I can do from home with my kids, and so that's like a little bit about me.
Cool. So tell us about your nonprofit. What do you do? How does it help people?
Yeah, so our nonprofit basically has two strategies for poverty alleviation in Honduras. The first being a more long term strategy, which is providing access to education for students. And so in Honduras and in countries actually all over the world, kids are required to wear a school uniform. So even though public education can be free, there are barriers to access to education. And so when kids don't have the required uniforms, and that can include like black leather shoes, things that can be kind of expensive, they often just don't go. Or parents will alternate like sending kids. So it's like, this is your year to go to school. Next year's this kid's year to go to school. And so on average, it takes students like almost 10 years to complete their first 6 years of school because they can't go consistently. And so what we do is we get sponsorships mostly from the US to provide uniforms and school supplies for the kids. So as far as school supplies go, the students are required to also provide like their own materials. So whether that be like your textbook, your workbook that you're working out of, like if you're doing math assignments, all those things. And so that's another limitation. So even if they have their uniform, but they don't have the reading material or the workbook to work out of, they also can't attend school because they can't do the material if they don't have like the material, basically.
Yeah.
And so it's those two things. It's the uniform and all the materials that they need. And that's kind of a long-term goal or way to address poverty because we know that if you have a high school diploma, that just in of itself allows you to get a better paying job. And there aren't a lot of job opportunities, especially for young people in rural Honduras. So having that high school diploma can be really valuable to be able to have the skill set to do jobs that are going to long term be more valuable. And then in terms of short term, what we do is provide small business loans for people who are wanting to either start a business or grow a business. The loans range from $250 to $1,250, depending on the need. And when they make their loan payments, then we recycle that money to be able to send loans out to new people. And it allows people to just basically do that, start or grow a business and put more food on their tables, especially when we're looking at these families are living on in conditions of extreme poverty, which is the standard being living on less than $2.15 a day. And so you look at families unable to put 3 meals on the table who now have a business and can better provide for their kids. We have a lot of our borrowers have doubled, tripled, quadrupled their income through these loans. And so they've proven to be successful, especially in the short term, just increasing the income of the household.
That's great. That's great. And what's the name of your nonprofit?
It's called the Markovia Project because it's based in an area called Markovia, Honduras.
And you said that's rural Honduras.
Yeah, it's in southern rural Honduras.
Okay, cool.
So I say rural, it can be, there are like cityscapes in kind of in that area, but some of the areas are more remote and isolated, I guess. But they're still I guess it's a weird concept because there's still large populations of people.
Right.
But
Not much
it's
infrastructure.
rural in the same way, I guess, that you could say Elko is rural, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So what got you first interested in Honduras and doing this project?
Yeah, so I lived in Honduras as a missionary for 18 months when I was younger. And then in 2020, someone had sent me a message on Instagram about another nonprofit operating in Honduras. And it was run by two women who were employing like 100 women in the slums of Honduras. And one of the women that was mainly running it had a lot of kids. She had a lot of other commitments. But one thing that I saw as I was following her was like, I'm like, if she can be in the United States and employing 100 women in Honduras and helping them in the slums, then that's probably something that I could do as well, right? A little bit of backstory too of just like our desire to start a nonprofit. My son, when he was 2.5, was diagnosed with cancer and underwent 3.5 years of treatment. And he's doing great now. But during that time, we received help from several nonprofits. And we always talked about then that we wanted to be able to pay it forward and find a way to create a nonprofit that would fill a meaningful need. And so we, like looked at lots of different options of different areas that had a specific need that we could fill. And in 2021, I had kept in touch with someone that I had lived with in Honduras, and she had reached out to me about the situation in Honduras and how the situation with the economy and everything. So in 2020, because of the pandemic, that really hurt their economy. And then they had back-to-back hurricanes that, displaced a lot of people, that caused a lot of damage. And the situation was really challenging. So we were kind of aware of that at the same time as my husband and I were facilitating a class about starting and growing a business. And one of the things that we recognized was that in Honduras, it's actually really easy to start a business because they don't have the same barriers that we have in the United States. The biggest barrier that they have is just that initial access to credit. So in the United States, like if you wanted to start a bakery out of your house, or even like, let's give the example of tamales because they sell tamales there.
Yeah.
If you wanted to sell tamales out of your house, you need a business in the US. You need a business license. You need a a cottage permit. There's all these things that you have to do to just like all these hoops to jump through and fees to pay and all these things. But if you want to sell tamales in Honduras, you can literally just make some tamales and go sell them, right? So they don't have the same barriers that we have here that they have there. The biggest barrier would just be that initial upfront cost of like buying some flour and some meat and making the tamales, right? And so we recognized that this could be an opportunity to be able to help people there, or I guess help them be able to help themselves in this situation, right? And so we started our organization in January of 2022, and with the idea that we would just try it out and see how it would go. And we would give like a loan each month and just kind of see. So it was kind of risky in terms of the idea of you're sending money to another country for people who have no credit history, no collateral, no savings, no maybe even like real skill set, right, to be able to. And so we were just going to kind of do it by like a trial basis. But so this was in January when we started. School in Honduras starts in February, and it was brought to our attention that some of the kids of some of the families that we were going to be working with couldn't afford to go to school. Mm-hmm. And so we just got on. I guess to me it was like the idea that a kid couldn't learn to read and write and would be illiterate for their life just because they couldn't have a uniform. I was like, that seems like a fixable problem. Like, that shouldn't be the reason that a child never learns to read or write. And so we got on Facebook and we were able to like solicit donations for 11 kids to go to school, which were all kids associated with families that we were going to be working with. And as soon as we had gotten those initial funds for those kids, it kind of became clear that we needed to make our organization more official, because people were starting to ask, like, there just needed to be more formality, I guess, too, in like how the money was being used and all those things. And so we worked to establish a legal nonprofit at that point. But we didn't start, I guess, initially with the intention of doing the kids. It just kind of became an addition to our initial endeavor, and then it kind of grew from there.
So you started out kind of trying to do these micro loans,
right?
But then you basically heard about this other issue that was like, this is the thing.
Right. And so I think, we do both. And basically the idea is one term is a more long-term strategy, one's a short-term strategy. And I think it requires both to see any true progress, because if we were to simply provide students with access to education and not do the component of helping their family put more food on the table, you're talking about kids going to school hungry, kids still, living in really difficult circumstances and stuff, and not even, aside from the education, like the possibility for a positive outcome would be diminished. So I think that they kind of go hand in hand together.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I just had a question. Okay. Yeah, great.
So, and I guess that brings up one thing that I wanted to talk about is like a pitfall of charity work, or it can be, is like they call it mission drift or mission creep. And so one piece of advice that we got when we were starting our nonprofit from another nonprofit person, I said, what's the best piece of advice you can give? And she said, basically, if you have a really clearly defined mission, that's going to allow you to, anytime anyone comes to you with ideas for how to spend your money or what you need to be doing, you can clearly identify either this aligns with our mission or it doesn't, right? And if you don't have that clearly in place, like I said, I mean, that kind of happened to us, and that we started out with these loans, and then it's like, well, hey, there's this other need over here, So now that once we identified, okay, we do want to do the loans, we do want to help the kids, we limit ourselves in that way. Yeah. So we really, even though there are medical needs, there are so many other needs that are within the community, but we specifically have identified these are the things we're going to focus on, and trying to do anything more than that would we wouldn't be able to be as efficient or do it as well by being stretched so thin or trying to do too many things.
Right. So how many about you? So it's been about, you said 2022 as it started,
right?
So it's been a couple of years.
Yeah.
How many kids are going to school? How many families?
Yeah, so our first year, like I mentioned, we started out with 11 kids. The following year, we had 60. And then we had a donor reach out and was like, what's it going to take to double the number of students you're helping with? And so we were able to secure a donation for a car to be able to help with the logistical transportation issues, because the way that we were doing it required, and some of these areas are an hour away from each other, and it's bus transportation and getting the kids to the shopping centers and things like that. And so we were able to secure funding for a car, and that helped us to get to 120 students. And so then that was 2024. Again, this year in 2025, we're sending about another 120 students.
So 120 total or 240 total?
120 total.
120 total. Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot of kids going to school.
And so some of those students have, we started with students of families with a loan, and then we kind of have expanded. But the goal is to continue to try to provide loans for more and more of those families. And obviously not all families qualify for a loan, because we're pretty generous in our loans as far as we don't disqualify very many people, but people who don't qualify for loans are anyone dealing with a major addiction that would prevent them from being able to use the money as intended and to repay it. And so that does prevent some families from participating.
Yeah, that's great. That's a lot of good work. I mean, so I guess you've touched on some of the major development issues that your nonprofit addresses. I guess what other development challenges people in Honduras face other than the ones that you addressed as you look at the
Right. So, like for example, we have students in 4 areas in 4 different communities at 17 different schools. And in one of our areas, they don't even have a high school. And so for the one high school student that we have there to be able to go to school, she has to take a 6 mile bus ride, which is $1 each way. And it doesn't sound like a lot, $1 each way bus fare, $2 a day, every day you go to school. It's about $40 a month. But when we're talking about families in extreme poverty that are living on a few dollars a day, there's just not the money there for that bus fare.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of an example. The students, I guess, in addition to other challenges they face, there's challenges related to transportation and things like that. And then there's still, like, we had a student who dropped out because he knew that his mom wasn't going to be able to pay some of these fees that the school was imposing. Like the school and the teacher were just like asking for some little extra money for some different projects that they had going on. And so he had dropped out right before finals, and we found out about it. And Armando was able to go and pay the fees for the school because they told him basically, if you don't pay these fees, then you can't graduate. And so he knew he wasn't going to be able to graduate. And so Armando went and paid the fees, and then and he was able to negotiate with the teacher for him to take his final exams, and so he could graduate that year. But as far as like outside of school, right, the challenges that they face are a lot. In 1998, there was Hurricane Mitch, which set the country back by estimates like 50 years in economic development. And so you look at it was basically 2000, and that time forward, all the development that was happening all around the world, but they were set back 50 years in development. And so you look at 70% of their infrastructure was destroyed, schools were destroyed, 1.5 million people were displaced. And so you're still seeing the effects of that now, even though that's been, over 25 years ago. And so I have a whole list. I'm like, they have a lot of challenges within their country, right? But there's political challenges as far as corruption within their government. They're on a drug trafficking route, which really doesn't help because the drugs going from South America to the United States have to pass through Honduras. There's like really no other way to get to the United States from South America without going through Honduras. So they have issues with, political stability, drug trafficking. There's not a lot of job opportunities or just like development within their country for infrastructure for jobs. So in the past, they've relied heavily on their economy of agriculture. But with climate change, that's been really challenging because you're seeing less rain in areas that historically had enough rain to be able to have crops. All sorts of things related to climate change in terms of flooding, in terms of all of that. And so that's an issue that they face. And then let's see. Right now, they have a history of like an authoritarian rule, but they're trying to kind of have a democracy. But it is interesting to see kind of where this will play out as far as where they are geopolitically. They are currently aligning with China and trying to get a lot of projects financed from China, they're going to incur a lot of debt. And then those relationships can kind of keep them trapped. And instead of being able to progress, they will be a little bit trapped there with that debt. So those are some of the challenges they face, and it's a lot. And I guess I didn't mention healthcare is another one. Just like we had a student get severe dengue, which can be deadly, and it's like same thing. Like it's $1 bus fare to get to the clinic, and we had a parent like reach out to our director of operations there and say like, my daughter, has severe dengue, and if left untreated, it can be deadly. And she's like, and I don't have $1 to get her to the clinic. So if you talk about the poverty that these people are facing, it's pretty extreme in terms of they have really poor health care. They have poor what's the word? Like their quality of life, lower quality of life, lower longevity in terms of life expectancy and all those things because of the lack of access to healthcare. So
Yeah. So when you're setting up your nonprofit, did you have to deal with the government of Honduras? I mean, is it just pretty?
So we actually are not established as a nonprofit in Honduras because I don't fully understand why, but they make a lot of requirements for legal nonprofit status in Honduras,
Okay.
and so to be able to be an established nonprofit in Honduras, we would need to have like 6 employees and have an office, and those are
In
it's just too
Honduras.
much for what we'd be able to do. But yeah, they do rely heavily on foreign aid, and I guess this is a good talking point
Yeah.
too. Is one of the things that we try to set ourselves apart a little bit in a lot of the aid that they get is they do get a lot of church aid coming in, and that is there. It comes with like, what is the word? So rather than just giving freely to people, it's like if you get baptized in our church, if you are meeting these requirements that we're setting for you, then we can help you. And so rather than doing that, we try to help people regardless of their religious affiliation and try to help people without any like strings attached in that way, because a lot of the aid that does come into Honduras is Christian aid, and it's coming specifically from churches and putting those kind of requirements on people.
Right. Cool.
So that's something that we
Yeah.
try to avoid as far as discriminating, I guess, in that way. But they also right now have I lived there in 2012, which was when they were had a designation of being the murder capital of the world, and I actually was robbed at gunpoint. But around the same time that I was there, they pulled out all Peace Corps members, and they have yet to return. Peace Corps members have yet to return to Honduras, so they have like relied a lot on foreign aid. I think especially just the historical context of like after Hurricane Mitch, they had a lot of international aid coming in. I think I figured out the damage in US dollars for adjusted for inflation would be like $12 billion in damage in today's dollars that it wrecked because just like I mentioned, they all the people's that houses were destroyed and the infrastructure and the schools and all the things. And so they did have a lot of aid come in,
Right.
and they do rely on that. And they also rely heavily on like remittances, which is people working in the US and sending money back to Honduras. And that's one of the ways, part of their economy. So.
Right. Well, in a disaster, it's kind of compounded by you don't have some wealthy government. We have a pretty wealthy government that's able to move a lot of resources if there's something going on somewhere, or a lot of safety net with government help, or insurance companies that are,
Yeah.
people have house insurance in more developed places, or if there's a disaster, then there's a lot of ways that wealthier nations find recovery, but
Right.
much harder for a smaller nation that doesn't have those kind of resources to rebuild 70% of their schools
Right.
for however much.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that's
And so I guess in the likelihood that something like that could happen again with climate change and everything, I think is relevant too. And they haven't been able to really put systems in place for future catastrophic events like that. So it was unfortunate because that does require, putting some systems in place for the future. You have to be a little bit forward thinking, and when you're just kind of still developing, it's hard to put those resources into those type of efforts.
so. I guess my next question is: in your experience, what are some good ways? What are some good ways and bad ways that sometimes money goes toward development projects? Or
Yeah. So I think basically from our experience, and we've made errors, we haven't been perfect, but we've learned a lot, is like anytime you're coming into a community as an outsider and you're trying to identify or even solve problems, you can be a little bit misguided, and you can be really well intentioned, but until you understand the culture and the different things in place, like what you think that they might need is maybe completely different from what they actually need. And I'll give like a kind of a lame example, but I mean, just kind of silly. But
Yeah.
On one of my last trips there, they said, you know, they had a shortage of church clothes for kids to wear to church. And so I thought, okay, great, I'm gonna be able to take some of this. And at the thrift store, I had found like a whole bunch of really cute toddler ties. So I was like, this is great. I'm gonna take like this, I don't remember how many bought, but like 30 toddler ties. And I was like so proud of myself. I was like, look at this. I've got all these toddler ties. And I like showed up to church and I went into this room that would have toddler age kids. And the room was filled with like little girls. And I just felt so stupid because I was like, oh, well, here's these pies that you clearly don't need, right? But it's like, and in my head, I thought, like, oh, like, of course they would need this thing. Like, we just can sometimes make assumptions based on our own, I don't know. And our assumptions, you know, can be totally wrong about what the actual need is in a situation. And so that's just kind of a silly example of like our own experience with that. But I think where people can go wrong in charity is anything that disempowers people is bad. And disempowering, like charities always talk about empowering people, and disempowering people is doing things for people that they can do for themselves. And so oftentimes we want to help people, but in doing so, we're actually disempowering them because what they, most of the time, people can figure it out. They can solve their own problems, right? And so when you just jump in and you say, I'm going to do this thing for you, that's actually really harmful, harmful for people. So I'll give an example of like when we very first started that kind of helped us understand the importance of people needing to be invested in what we're doing. And so there was a family that had a significant need to have some sort of small business, to have some sort of income. And so we thought, well, maybe a great business, like we came up with this idea for a great business for her, which would be selling clothes. And so in Honduras, they get a lot of clothes, like they'll get them in big, what's it called? Like shipments or whatever of used clothes from the US. And then they can go around and like peddle those to people. And so we said, we pitched this to this woman and we said, here's this great idea that you can do. And we're going to give you this loan for this thing of clothes and you're going to be able to resell it and it's going to be great. And immediately she ran into some major issues. One being like that was not her personality. Like it wasn't something that she wanted to do. Like that wasn't her idea of like a good time, right? She ran into just like a struggle of literally people in Honduras often can't even afford like to buy like a shirt for $1, right? And so people were wanting to buy things on credit and to say, okay, I'm going to take this shirt for my kids, and I'll pay you next time or we'll get you the money or whatever, right? And then they wouldn't. And so she ended up with just like a lot of people indebted to her and you know, like clothes that wouldn't sell or whatever. And anyway, it didn't really work out. But I think the reason it didn't work out is because we never really consulted with her of like, what would you want to do, or what interests do you have, or what skill sets do you have, or what are your thoughts about it and everything, right? Because everybody has different skill sets and abilities.
Yeah.
And so right away we realized that was the last loan that we ever did that we gave somebody the idea, because after that we always asked somebody, what ideas do you have? What have you thought about? If you could have a business, what could you do? If money was no issue, have you ever thought about what type of business what you would do? What kind of things are you interested in, right? And from there we're able to find, you know, people have these ideas like, hey, I've had this idea for a long time of this business and I think it'd be so cool. And they're invested in it and then they succeed. But if you come as an outsider and you're saying, well, you should do this because this is a really good idea, right? That's when it's bad. But I think there's lots of examples of just like charity gone wrong, and I think we'll talk about at the end just like some books that kind of address that really opened my mind to that concept that like people need probably less help than we think, and when we're doing things for people that they can do for themselves, we're actually doing more harm than good. So
Yeah. So tell me some books you've read, some information that because you've done a lot of research on this. So what are some
yeah,
that really
yes.
affected you and that you would say my students or others should read about this?
Yeah, so one of them is, we just talked about this, building communities from the inside out. So it's the idea within community development that outsiders come into a community and they want to just have their outside ideas about things, and that generally isn't effective. But if you go into a community and you identify leadership and you identify what assets that they do have in place, then you're way more effective because you have buy-in from the people, you're meeting their needs, and it's just incredibly more effective to come from the inside out rather than from the outside in. So that's the name of that book. And then two that kind of relate to what we were just talking about, how charities can be ineffective, or not even ineffective, I guess, but also like create a dependency or create harm within the communities they're trying to help, are Toxic Charity. Another one is When Helping Hurts. And those both kind of address those topics of, like we are really well intentioned in our ideas to go in and help other people, but sometimes it's totally misguided in what they actually need. There's a book by Peter Singer, who is kind of the father of I can't think of the word, effective altruism.
Yeah.
And it's The Most Good You Can Do. And he talks about really that we have this moral obligation to help people wherever they are in the world, and that if we have the means, then we also have the moral obligation to be able to help people, because there are simple ways that people's lives can be saved. Like if we want to talk about valuing lives, we can talk about vaccines or different efforts all over the world that can, for a very low cost per person, can save lives, right? And then I haven't actually read it, but it's come highly recommended to me. My son read it, my husband read it, and I know it's also a book or a movie. So if you want to just watch the movie instead, but The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, and it's about a kid who was able to go to his local library and learn how to create a well for his community that was experiencing like extreme famine, and kind of just, it's very motivating and inspiring about the potential that each person has to create the change in their community. And it kind of reminds us too, like, he didn't need somebody to come in and save him per se, right? It's like he had within him the capacity to problem solve and identify this need within his community. And so that's, I think, a really good book. And then Melinda Gates, which, she does a ton of philanthropy. She wrote a book called The Moment of Lift, and it's kind of a girl power book, but it talks a lot about the power of helping women. And when we help women, we make a lot more difference than initiatives maybe that help men, because when we're helping women are primarily in a lot of places responsible for feeding their children and providing in those ways. And so when you're empowering women, you're creating you're helping children, and children are the future, right? So that all just kind of makes sense.
Have you ever seen the documentary Girl Rising?
No, but I should check it out.
Oh yeah, I was yeah. I think it's narrated by Liam Neeson, but it's years back. Anyway, it's similar. It's about the benefits, especially of educating girls, particularly in communities where education is imbalanced and mostly boys are being educated, and how educating girls can really help development. Anyway, it's similar. It sounds like that Melinda Gates book you're talking about. So
yeah, and I think like on terms of like the value of education, there's value in education beyond like, this will allow you to get a better job, right? I mean, there's that. But I think there's value even for kids who might not graduate high school or who might stay in their small town. There's value in being able to read and write, to just be able to navigate the world in terms of like your healthcare and all of these things. Because we have, interestingly, like in talking to some of these kids in some of these really remote places in Honduras, I say, would you ever want to live anywhere else? Would you ever want to live in the city? Would you ever want to like have a job somewhere? And they're like, oh, the city's loud. The city's crowded. Oh, the city, I would never want to live in the city. Right. And so, you wonder like, well, what is the value of education for someone who may just end up living in their small town without a lot of opportunities? But I think there is value in being able to like run a small business. Even like we work in a small fishing community, and they're fishing, but they still need to make sure that someone isn't taking advantage of them when it comes to how much they're getting paid per pound for fish and different things like that, right? Those things that we take for granted, like we take for granted being able to read a sign, we take for granted being able to do basic math. If I say here's my fish for you, that someone's going to pay us the just amount or whatever, right? And so I think that there's a lot of value in education, but it goes beyond, I guess, this idea that to be successful you would have to be a doctor or a lawyer or like have some other profession, because I think the reality for a lot of the kids that we work with isn't that. It isn't that they're going to now go on and have some major profession, as much as that they're going to be a positive influence within their community and be able to use their knowledge of reading and writing and those things to navigate the world that they live in.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of like you're saying, you build from the community inside out. You're not necessarily saying to these kids, okay, our goal is for you to go to the city and become a high-powered attorney, or it's like reading and writing has value. We're going to help
Yeah.
you get out of it, and it's not even part of development. It's not development used to be thought of as just economic, right? And now people are recognizing it's a lot more than just economic. In the last few decades, people are talking about like quality of life matters. People's freedom to do what they want matters. It's not just about, making a bunch of money and moving.
Right.
So
yeah,
that's a.
I guess one last thought, and we're kind of out of time, but one last thought I had is, I guess, the importance of like collaborating with other organizations and working together to like combine your assets or experiences to be able to collectively accomplish some greater good. Because right now we have let's see, what's today, we have this in a few days we have a Rotary Club in Alabama that's going to go, and they're going to be able to do eye exams for some of our students. And interesting, like we have 120 students and not a single kid wears glasses. And you think about statistically, the odds are that some of those kids probably have pretty bad eyesight or need for glasses,
Right.
and how that affects their schooling. And so if you can't read the board, if you can't read the paper in front of you, how does that affect, and probably what happens is those kids drop out because it's like, oh, I couldn't figure out what the teacher, the
Right.
board or whatever. And so anyway, there's so many components, right, to like education. Like I mentioned, like you have access to transportation, all of the things that make it so that a child could be successful in school. But we can't take that all on, but we can work with other organizations, in this case, like another organization that they're sending right now down already eye doctors. And so they're like, yeah, we can do some eye exams for some of your kids, right? And so there's a lot of like collaboration that goes on to be able to be effective. And I think in community development, it's important to identify those resources and be willing to partner and work together. And then rather than trying to do everything yourself, identify who are the other players in the game and work together, and you can accomplish a lot more that way.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah. So anything else, Emily, you want to share? I think we are out of time, but do you have any parting thoughts?
The last that I just thought about sharing with you guys is, I grew up in Austin, Nevada. It's a small town. And, I didn't think that I would be doing something like this, making a difference in somewhere thousands of miles away. But you guys have the potential within yourselves to do really great things. And I hope that you remember that. I hope that you found value in this, and that going forward that you find meaningful ways to serve within your communities. And, it doesn't need to be anything like what I'm doing. It can be things really simple within our own community. Like we have the State Farm insurance lady that collects coats every year for kids. There are like really simple things that we can do that make the world a better place. And it starts with ourselves. It starts with how we treat those around us. It starts with our own community, and then it kind of expands from there. But the potential that you have as young people to do really great things are unlimited. And I hope you enjoyed this, that you take something away from it, and that you have a lot of potential to do a lot of good things in the world.
Thanks, Emily. It was great talking to you. Great getting your perspective and learning about what you're doing. And yeah, it's impressive the amount of people you're helping. And yeah, I'm glad we can do this for our students. So I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, yeah, have a good one. I'll talk to you later.